Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's an absolute pleasure to be here for an occasion which is marked for something very, very significant for the year, but also get an opportunity to speak and to interact with many of the dons of the industry at this forum, and particularly after Swamiji, who set the bar so high and at a celestial level. So it is quite challenging. But nevertheless, I just want to share some of the thoughts around entrepreneurship and entrepreneur's role, particularly given that what Swamiji was just mentioning about everybody is here or else outside looking for jobs. And the point is, entrepreneurs don't look for jobs. They create their own jobs. They create jobs for others. And to that extent, it is extremely relevant to speak about a topic on that which lays down the foundation or some grounds about entrepreneurship. So, by the way, a quick question. How many of you have been entrepreneurs at some point in time in life here? Okay. Quite a few. Great. So, how many of you consider yourself a successful entrepreneur? I know Mr. Puri is there, but other than that, of course, there are few. Great. I don't fall into that category. What I've got to share with you as multiple hats that I have earned over the years, over 30 decades with my tri-state entrepreneurship. Of course, as a researcher, as a scholar, I've been studying entrepreneurship for many years, but also as somebody who had tried his hands as a co-founder of 3 startups, and the 4th startup is about to be founded. And also as an entrepreneur, basically taking a plunge in Infosys context, try to set up the innovation initiatives and doing a corporate entrepreneurship. Also start doing entrepreneurship in an IIM context, setting up new institution or setting up new programs. So there are certain things that I did myself, but more as a student of this subject. And of course, I've been engaged as an advisor and educator for many years of this. So what I see that I've learned mostly from failures, because many of those initiatives that I'm talking about, some of them are success, but many of them are failures. And that's what I bring in the table as a failure in terms of some insights that comes in here. Of course, there are some definitional issues. Let's not delve into that, but please understand that the French word that is the origin of entrepreneurship means to undertake something. And that's what saying it is not about doing job for others, but creating job for others. It's also, there are various spectrum of entrepreneurship that exist. We're not going to touch upon everything, but some of the principles are quite common. And I have the good fortune of trying to experiment and also engage with all sets of entrepreneurs classes that we're talking about scalable entrepreneurship, which is, a kind of popularized by the Silicon Valley, being the order of the day. Everybody wants to be like that, creating the next unicorn. But then there is a large majority of effort that goes in actually corporate entrepreneurship within established corporations, because if you look at all the large corporations, multi-generational corporations which have into multiple geographies, are actually the corporations which are extremely entrepreneurial and created many businesses. And then there comes the family the business entrepreneurship, which is both the single family entrepreneurship, but business families which are actually created, multiple companies, enterprises over generations, what we call the family business groups, which control an enormous amount of entrepreneurial capital and creation of jobs and contribution to the economy in different parts of the globe. And then the new form of entrepreneurship that you see that has emerged in the recent decades is social entrepreneurship. There are many problems in economy, society, which require solutions. And those solutions may not amount to be making profit, but there are entrepreneurs, there are individuals who believe that they can solve those problems, and they engage in such processes and thereby solve some of those social and environmental problems, and that to bring about change in the society. So that is social entrepreneurship. You have the Kodak moment, what you are familiar with, but Kodak moment is vanishing or vanished all the process. And I don't want to delve into that, but you know, many of us lives been very much with the part of the Kodak moment, but that has been gone. And this is not the new thing. This is not the exception. Kodak is the example of regular phenomena. Another point that Samiji was mentioning, he didn't mention the name of the company, but he gave the data. It was exactly what he was mentioning about BlackBerry, the RIM, which was ruling the say personal device on communication, but just in 5 years disappeared from the market. So also you would see that there is a study that was being done 10 years ago, which was looking at the basically survival rate of the Standard & Poor 500 firms over 100 years. And what you see that very interesting facets, that the lifespan of the successful firms who are in the category of Standard 500, Standard & Poor 500 are going down drastically from 90 years to 10, 12, 15 years. And therefore, there is a significant death and also the birth of newer enterprises who are becoming successful in a very short span of time. And that's what actually makes the entrepreneurship so exciting, so I would say valuable and important in our context. Having said that, we also see that while entrepreneurship is very exciting, creating ventures are very exciting, these are the need of the hour, that they actually make a lot of contribution to the society. But however, the real venture realities are very grim. It has actually more ventures fail than succeed. And even if you look at the last 7, 8, 10 years, we are talking about creation of many unicorns in India. We have crossed 100 unicorns, etc. A lot of celebration that happens. But the grim reality of it is, there is a data, you see the last year, more than 2,000 startups had just vanished. That they didn't succeed or they failed. So, and that number is not something which is unique for a particular year. Every year you see there are thousands of startups come and they just go. Only few make big really, but we celebrate those bigs. So some of the, quickly I put together some data and looking at some of those 160 firms which have actually failed in the recent years, and we see that there are several reasons for such failures. But what is most important, see that they're not meeting customers' expectations as one of the highlight of it. And there are other reasons in terms of competition, in terms of poor economics, etc. But not meeting the customer expectation is something which comes to be a very important reason. Also, you see that more ways they fail than succeed. There are products, there are cost, there are issues of revenue, there are issues of market not being accepting. Okay, so what could be the reasons? That some of the assumptions of consumer needs validation, which has not been done properly, and therefore they fail. And some of the existing competitors are also not seeing that the example or the story that Samiji was mentioning was very apt in that context. So the customer, so at the end of the day, for any entrepreneurship to succeed or any new venture to succeed, the customers have to accept it. And then customers accept, the perception becomes the reality for us. So, while we see that so many failures in entrepreneurship, but then how come so many players like Apple, Microsoft, Facebook, Google, DMart, Flipkart, Zomato, all these companies are succeeding? Are there any particular recipes that help them to succeed? And then again, the research study had shown that there are few factors which actually contribute very significantly in the success of such new ventures that we are talking about. One is the timing. Because if you look at their timing, team, execution, idea, these are all important, but then timing of the venture becomes very, very critical. So in that context, therefore, you'll see that many of those ventures that actually didn't succeed sow the seed for future successful entrepreneurs, because that from their failures, the new entrepreneur learns some of these things, and perhaps the context gives them right, and then at that time that another entrepreneur comes in and it succeeds. So what happens on the new ventures that succeed? There are 5 essential elements, therefore, to successful entrepreneurial ventures as per the study that we're talking about. The idea makes a team and execution, entrepreneurial team, and also the team of the founding team that you create. Then, of course, the business model, the end-to-end value creation potential, and how do you extract value out of it. And then the funding plays a critical role in terms of say, converting an idea into a reality. But the timing, that point I was talking about, are very, very critical. So therefore, let's go into that, what you call the playbook part of it with this context. Basically, there are more reasons for failure than success. There are more failures than success, but then there are certain, say, processes, certain approaches that we can learn from those failures and some of the successful entrepreneurs or new ventures to say, put a blueprint in terms of what could be done. But then with this caveat that whatever you say become my 30 years of delving with this is the entrepreneurship is very much contextual, and every new enterprise actually has the more potential to fail than they succeed. But still within that, can we have some, say, guidelines for that? So in terms of entrepreneur's playbook, two things are very important to understand. And I think Swamiji, when he was mentioning, I was reflecting on it, he said something very, very powerful on that. When he said entrepreneurship requires knowing and understanding both. What is knowing? Knowing is actually science and technology. But knowing doesn't necessarily mean that we understand. Understanding requires empathy. So the combination of knowledge, technology, and understanding and empathy together makes a venture successful. And that's what the hallmark of most successful enterprises. That they've been able to, because the empathy comes from the understanding of the customer, understanding of the market better. Whereas the knowledge part gives you how do you identify a problem and then solve the problem, but particularly the solution of the problem. And when you're talking about this automation, technology, etc., if you look at the most impact on the technology is on the knowledge side, on the knowing side. Understanding is just not possible only through artificial intelligence. Because artificial intelligence fundamentally depends on the past data and information. And understanding requires empathy, which requires a connection with the heart and evolution of what's happening in the market and consumer. And therefore, entrepreneurship is one area which not ChatGPT or any other auto-generative thing you can be able to replace. They might aid you in terms of the solution side, but it is not going to replace an entrepreneur. And to that extent, therefore, it is vitally important in today's context that why we are talking about promoting entrepreneurship in the societies and particularly the countries like us, that where creation of jobs is the most important, say, social problem that we have been, or economic problem that we are facing as a society. So, therefore, we just mentioned about knowing, so entrepreneur needs to understand the market reality and provide a winning value proposition. That's the standard thing, but that requires the connection of knowledge and the impact. There are, in the playbook, few questions that I like to leave with it. There are many entrepreneurs here who have done it multiple times, so you know that. First of all, understanding what is the problem. Which problem that you want to solve. Now, when you're talking about a purpose for an entrepreneur is fundamentally solving a problem. Okay? And then, of course, the question comes, do customers want that solution? Even if I solve this problem, but is there anybody to buy that solution? Okay, so that's a very important question. And there are so many entrepreneurs who actually had addressed very, very critical problems, but then the customers are willing to buy such solutions that they have come up with. Then the third element is, even if I have the solution, customers are willing to buy such a solution, but can I do it? Can I build that solution? So do I have the knowledge, the technology, to do that? Then, of course, comes the other question, can we build a profitable business out of that? So as an entrepreneurship, and particularly in a commercial context, you've got to have those, even if you build a solution, that solution has to be profitable. But it is just not profitable, that will be enough. You need to, can you sustainably grow your business? That's also very important because it can be profitable in a small scale or at a limited scale. But can you sustain that? Can you sustain that or over a period of time and grow and make their real impact? Because the the entrepreneurship doesn't get completed till the time that you have been able to scale it up significantly and make impact to the larger context. Or, so not even scale, sometimes you can replicate it. There's also a replication model possible. But then, moot point is that if you have got a solution for which there are a large number of customers are willing to pay, that solution must reach to as many people as possible, as many customers as possible. So growth becomes very important questions in the entrepreneur's playbook. Of course, the idea is, does that idea mean opportunities? Do problems lead to opportunities? Not necessarily so. An idea comes, or becomes an entrepreneurial opportunity only when it can solve a problem, it adds value to the consumer or customer, and of course, it makes money in the context that it communicated to all the stakeholders that were involved in that proposition, of making that the value proposition reality in the value chain. They see a potential, and therefore they also contribute. And of course, being a good fit with the entrepreneur and the entrepreneurial team, because you cannot be building an enterprise unless you are passionate about it. And therefore, the idea has to have a fit with the entrepreneurs, their own mindset, and also the what do you call, psychology. So how do you do this? Therefore, convert an idea into entrepreneurial opportunity, and do that through an entrepreneurial venture that eliminates high customer dissatisfaction and offering solution to the customer. So there are techniques by which we do that. I will skip this part quickly given the time constraint, but there are frameworks actually which help you to identify those kind of areas where the customers are dissatisfied, and coming up with what level of understanding, say, dissatisfaction that exists, how critical that solution that you can provide to cater to the dissatisfaction, and through that coming up with a venture. So I would do that, but idea to entrepreneurial opportunity, therefore, so comes to solving pain points, as I mentioned, to notice inefficiency, to inconveniences the consumers are going through, and then of course any problems leads to big opportunities, no problems, no solutions. So we know that. Now, just an example, touching point, if you remember what happened with the rise of Levi's, that the problem was working clothes for mining workers are not there, and there it was not lasting, and they need to clean the clothes multiple times, and therefore that becomes an opportunity. And then the solution was first pair of jeans which last long. And that's become a revolution of not only an enterprise, but then an industry altogether. So this is the metrics that I was talking about. I'll not elaborate much on that, but there is a process by which you can systematically go in the different aspects of the value chain and figure out where the dissatisfaction exists, and therefore create an opportunity for a new venture. So there are many companies who have actually done this in that manner. So this was a paper that we wrote a few years ago, and we can do that. The other point that I want to leave as a thought is that getting ideas is something which is not anybody's monopoly, or it is not to be restricted in a particular zone. Getting ideas can be from everywhere, from anywhere, okay? And it's about the ideas are the lifeblood of business as we understand that, or in a new venture. So therefore it is very important. So, and ideas can be from any source. You can cross-pollinate ideas. You can actually develop a pervasive and insatiable thirst for the good ideas, basically constantly looking for and doing that. So any entrepreneur successful entrepreneur meet, there is something that's unique about them. They're constantly engaging in conversation or observation and trying to figure out the new ideas. And of course, study competitors closely, that can also give an important opportunity. And most importantly, plagiarizing of ideas. It's absolute legitimate, and therefore, as it is legitimate, plagiarizing of ideas is not a bad thing, as long because in venture, the idea is not the critical thing. Idea to solution and delivering it a value, that is where the real entrepreneur's skill comes in. And therefore, if you look at Apple computer, then now Apple Incorporation, what did Steve Jobs do? He actually, if you look at as a co-founder, when he was toured Xerox, and he figured out that the graphic user interface that Xerox was developed in their laboratory, which was been shown to Steve Jobs, but Xerox was not doing anything with those. And what Steve Jobs did, he picked that up, he copied it, and then he revolutionized the personal computer industry. Until today, that particular technology is being, or the interface is being the dominant force in personal computer or any other devices that you are talking about which are interactive. So that was a blatant plagiarism in terms of the idea. But then nobody questions Steve Jobs because he was the person who could bring that idea onto and revolutionize the humankind. So there are multiple steps that you have to follow in terms of successful entrepreneurship creation. Again, I don't want to elaborate that, but the point is from ideation to actually cash flow and a steady cash flow or a growing cash flow, there are many, many steps that you have to take. And here it's more like presented as a linear form. But again, what I just want to caution to you, that actually the entrepreneurship or creation of new venture is not a linear form. It is always about doing something with lots of experiments, a lot of fooling around, a lot of failing, succeeding sometimes, failing most of the times, and continuously engaging in that. And in that process also there is an element of planning, but at the same time an element of risk-taking and experimentation. And also when you are doing this, it is not that a particular individual or a team of people are only engaged in it. There are so many players in the ecosystem, okay, who are actually engaged in the process of the creation of or fooling around or experimentation, and each of them, they contribute significantly in the success of an idea, successfully translating an idea into a real outcome, and then a cash flow and then a feedback loop. So in that process, therefore, these entrepreneurs win by experimenting and struggling toward breakthroughs, ideas, managing by, say, avoiding failures. Whereas managers, if you look at that, the fundamental focus has been actually avoiding failures. Whereas entrepreneurs are ingrained in terms of taking the struggle to an experiment and succeed. But as I was pointed out, there are so many ecosystem players who actually participate in that process, and many times they don't get as much of adulation and the credit as an entrepreneur or a successful entrepreneur does. But then fundamentally you need to understand that entrepreneurial venture, therefore, is not at one, say, cowboy act of an entrepreneur. There are ecosystems, there are society encouragement, there are economic conditions, and also the other kinds of paraphernalias to be present for a successful entrepreneurial venture. And to that extent, therefore, as you say, that why this could be the India's decades for the next few years, because many of those conditions are now in place, which was missing 25, 30 years ago when we were basically, as a student, we were trying to get into this process. And many of you who have experimented that and have seen that struggle that you have gone through in such a kind of ecosystem versus today when the ecosystem is much more conducive. And also, if you look at the entrepreneurship or a journey of an entrepreneur, is more like an expedition. It is an expedition for a set of hypothetical path to reach a destination. You are not sure about where you are, because that's what point of underlying is that every time you are experimenting and you are not sure. There is a notion to it, but you can actually keep on experimenting and failing and fooling, etc., etc. But in the process of experimentation, it is not something that you are doing it just randomly. There are hypotheses, and you are in the experimentation, you are testing out, validating those hypotheses, or you are ruling out those hypotheses. That element of curiosity and the element of constantly learning and willing to learn through success and failure, and then creating a feedback loop becomes an important element to that expedition. So therefore, to that extent, that's why it is extremely toxic actually to be an entrepreneur, that constantly intoxicate you in terms of doing that. And it requires a special kind of ability. And of course, preserve, adapt, and even pivot if needed as you go on experimenting and learning from that. So if you are driving to work, you don't give up if there is a detour. So therefore, this is more like an highway versus a detour that you have to take. And if there are roadblocks, you take the detour. And that's what constant experimentation and effectuation of the entrepreneur that helps. And you identify newer set of ideas. So three things that in this journey of an entrepreneur becomes very, very critical, as been shown by the research, is of course, there is a need for a passion. Entrepreneurs need to be passionate. But then that passion has to be also detached. because it is important, then when to pull the plugs. Because if you get committed, and many times it would happen that you will not be able to say, the venture is not heading anywhere or successfully. You need to have the ability to pull the plug. And therefore, the passion is there, but the passion is in terms of the idea, the solution that you are getting in. But the moment you are, but passion is, you are not, detached passion is required because you are experimental in terms of the paths that you are taking. Then, of course, inherently you have to break the rules. And that's important, and that's why the entrepreneurs many times don't have a very happy life, because they get into confrontation with many of those, the other players in the ecosystem, because they have to break rules. And of course, they have to have the courage. Now, there are few specific points have been asked to cover during the process, so I just want to quickly go through those things. In the playbook, there are many things, but few important points is about, one is how to manage conflict. Okay? So entrepreneurial journey is something which is actually, say, driven by the problem-solving issues, that therefore there are passion to drive, and in the process of doing that, you can actually have, confront with multiple kind of situation. You confront with multiple kind of actors in the ecosystem, and therefore you might face challenges in terms of legalities, and that is how to overcome that. They have to handle that. You also say there are certain situations, like some of the entrepreneurs who have been into cryptocurrencies in the recent years are facing a significant challenge, because for many of the economies of countries, the cryptocurrency has not been legalized. And therefore, many of the quick dirty study that I did, I found that some of the entrepreneurs failed because of those kind of legal issues. So that is, and you need to have overcome those conflicts, both in the regulation sense, and also there are contractual agreements. Then, of course, complying with the law, etc. And what are the difference? Another thing is that, as I said, that in the entrepreneurial ecosystem, you need to deal with multiple actors, and therefore, any actors you are say coming together, there will be conflicts. There is potential conflicts, and resolving those conflicts is something which is very, very important. And unfortunately, what has been seen as a behaviorally, that many of the entrepreneurs, particularly it is happening in today's context, where many of the startup entrepreneurs are very young, coming fresh out of the college, or sometimes they're in the college, and their behavioral skill in terms of dealing with such conflicts is a very short supply. So what we see among our students or many other young entrepreneurs that we had an opportunity to interact or mentor, that aspects of it are not well developed. And that's the point where Swamiji was mentioning about the empathy quotient is very, very critical. So the question of mindfulness, those are the kind of techniques actually help them to resolve conflict, because the passion to deliver something, the inquisitiveness or the curiosity to doing something, etc. But then at the same time to be able to understand that the zone of conflicts where you need to allow others the space to move on. Okay? So that's something which is important in the conflict. The conflict can be in terms of customers, the products and services are not good, and in this context, as we understand, the customers is always right. And that notion is very, very important to inculcate. And therefore, because that gives an opportunity to reflect and look back. So with partners and suppliers also, there are similar kind of issues might come up. With employees, because as we said, that the entrepreneurs are actually job creators, but at the same time, their creation of what he called solution is dependent on hundreds and thousands of others. And those employees are equal partner to this process. And therefore, in that model, the conflict that is existing, that many of you have experienced, is actually needs to be resolved. And unfortunately, as I again by mentioning, that many of the new generation entrepreneurs struggle in terms of doing that, because still they want a quick solution or get to the end result too quickly, which necessarily not the possible in this context. So, of course, with the investors, I will actually say money funding is very important, and in the process, sometimes many of those startup entrepreneurs, as we see, and that's a significant distinction that we see in the context of a corporate entrepreneurship versus in a startup ecosystem, that the investors and the founders or the entrepreneurs, they may not see eye to eye on many of the issues on the enterprise. But then that's a zone of conflict. But at the end of the day, the investors are as important a stakeholder in the journey of the enterprise. And therefore, again, the entrepreneurs have to have the ability and, first of all, appreciation and also the ability to resolve such conflicts which can actually potentially kill a venture. And we have so many such examples that we see that. Similarly, in a family enterprise context, also the same thing that we see, that many of the family youngsters, they struggle with navigating the space of family entrepreneurship because the seniors who control the resources, they don't see eye to eye in terms of many of those ideas and also the approaches that the youngsters want to take. And that becomes a significant zone of conflict in the intergenerational space in a new venture in a family context. So the other set of managing conflicts is at a very individual, at a personalized level. Like as an entrepreneur, it's extremely stressful a job which requires intense interaction, or rather spending time for months and in years together. So therefore, many a times it will be able to be away from the family, or even if you are there within the family context, may not be able to interact with the family as much as it should be, or spending quality time with the family. But that creates potential conflict. Okay, and handling those issues are also very, very tricky and important in the context. And therefore, as a playbook, when I'm saying that becomes, and sometimes it doesn't get the due attention, or most of the time it doesn't get the due attention. And to that extent, therefore, the entrepreneurs, even they are successful as an entrepreneur in terms of venture, but they become quite miserable in the life as a personal or a home life. And that is not a very good sign, because if that happens, then they, as a role model, they don't really inspire the next generation. So there are, of course, internal conflicts in terms of so many conflicting choices that are coming in as an entrepreneur. And as you succeed more, those choices are more and more coming in. And how do you deal with that? And in that context, therefore, evolution of a person and more spiritually, more emotionally becomes very, very important. So mindfulness and other kinds of things become increasingly important. So, and then of course there are litigation, etc. So we can skip this portion of it. So I just quickly conceptualized a kind of framework which can be very handy in terms of dealing with, as you said, there are multiple stakeholders, and therefore how do you deal with them in terms of conflict potential and what kind you do. So therefore, if you look at in terms of conflict potential on the both sides, there are customers and employees. Where the conflict potential, as I said, is very high. Okay, it's very high, but they're also very critical, because success of an entrepreneur enterprise, it squarely depends on whether the solution is bought by the customer, or whatever you offer to the customer, and whether the solution is perfect or for the need of the customer is determined by the employees. And therefore, there are very critical stakeholders, and the conflict zone, because there is a much greater intensity of interaction there. So therefore, you need to keep them satisfied. So customers and employees, therefore, the two sides of the same coin. And if any smart entrepreneur would get to understand that they need to keep both of them equally satisfied. Okay. But then there are things like investor, as I said, there are conflicts potential with investors, creditors, etc. So you need to manage them closely. There are more in communication, more interaction that is important. Therefore, you have to manage them. And then there are other players like the competitors, the community, the government, where your basically conflict potential is less. But they are also in the process. You can sometimes get into conflict, and therefore you cannot be oblivious to them. You need to be monitoring them carefully. And then, of course, the partners who are the suppliers or the other channel partners, etc. You need to keep them in the loop, keep them informed. So there is a quick, dirty way to actually categorize different stakeholders and then evolve your own strategy in terms of how you actually manage the conflict. In a corporate context, in a corporate entrepreneurship context, where you see that the fundamental tension, or even a family entrepreneurship context, the fundamental tension comes from this fundamental issue of exploitation and exploration, which is, Professor March, way back in 1991, in a famous paper, had actually articulated that so brilliantly, that you have a successful enterprise, a successful corporate or a family business, there is a constant need for continuing the success in the same business, because that is what generates the cash for the future. But then, you cannot be standing on the laurels of the past and the present. You need to create a future, and the future is very different from the current. And therefore, you need to constantly explore with the new ideas, new businesses. And that's where the exploration part comes in, which is more clear, because the exploitation has a very specific order in terms of the model, the operating principles, the practices, SOPs, all are laid down. The structure, the systems. Whereas the exploration is fundamentally is about chaos. You don't, there are uncertainty, like what we are talking about, a lot of experimentation, fooling around. And within the same organization setup or a family business setup, managing that is the fundamental tension that you're talking about, and then the balancing act is very important. So that's one of the most important conflict management issues in a corporate entrepreneurship context. Then there is also an issue of, say, next-gen grooming, and because let's not look at succession, because most of somebody might say that, okay, we are talking about an entrepreneurial venture, why are you talking about a succession or a grooming of next-gen? But then you don't see that entrepreneurship as somebody that you will start as a founder and then after 30 years you will retire. No, not necessarily true. So there is a fundamental issue of handling succession, creating teams, delegating it is involved in any enterprise context, whether it is a 5-year-old or a 50-year-old. And the succession challenges for a 30-year founder is basically that you are generating great ideas, you are starting up, putting technology in place, but then there is a need for scaling up. There is a need for becoming more efficient, reaching out to more set of, say, customers or stakeholders. Now, in that process, maybe that 30-year-old entrepreneur may not have the same skills for scaling up. Somebody who might have an experience of running scale business might be a better choice to lead the organization. And as an entrepreneur, you need to be open to such kind of possibilities and actively looking for it. So transition from founders to next generation of entrepreneur, that there are different kinds of entrepreneurs and each of them faces a different kind of challenges. There are serial entrepreneurs, and then there are family business entrepreneurs, and then of course there are empire builders. So there are certain entrepreneurs who not only move from one thing, but they like to create empire. So all these business groups, etc., that we are talking about, we can see that empire building model is there. So, and depending on which kind of entrepreneur that you are in, this model will be evolving, will be changing. And of course, very important point here is that the market for successors in a new enterprise context or new venture context are not very well developed. So in most part of the world, and particularly the context that we are in, that you can't go and shop your successors. You need to really, therefore, need to groom from within and doing that. And there are plenty of examples that you know in the corporate context, both in the family business context as well as in the startup context, that the inability to groom talents from within and trying to bring talents from outside to do that, it actually didn't work out well, because there are several issues of DNA, etc., that we'll talk about later. So again, the entrepreneurial venture goes through multiple stages, stages of the life cycle, and therefore there are different needs of capabilities that exist in that. And so, as I said, therefore the entrepreneur has to be willing to actually accommodate those new skills, new capabilities by bringing in more people, grooming them, giving them the opportunity to flourish. And then, say, in that process, as an entrepreneur or the team of entrepreneurs, you get more space, more opportunities to do something bigger and better. Then there are other succession issues about that in the founder-driven family, or owner-driven family, or hired professional-driven family. Each of context, you would see that there are certain phases of the business that an entrepreneur is very good. But then at another phase of the business, perhaps you need a different kind of skilled people. There are very few occasions where you will see that one person is, say, for all contexts, will be equally effective and brilliant. And that process has to be ingrained in an entrepreneurial playbook, so that how you actually create such every stage of the evolution of the enterprise, you get internal talents or sometimes augment talents from outside to make that happen. But these are not automatic. These are something that has to be planned and done well in advance. But then every organization is unfortunately as a DNA that is which is developed by the entrepreneur, the founder, the team over a period of time, and that kind of is shaped by that. And point problem is finding outside person or finding even internal talent without proper grooming to actually will grow that legacy or grow that the culture and effectively navigate that is a challenge. And again, we see there are plenty of such examples where things went wrong. So I think I have already got a signal, so to move first, so or rather to complete it. So there is another element which is very well known, so that I don't have to touch that part too much. It is about that is innovation is the heart of entrepreneurship. Everybody knows, and innovation, there are lots of work has been done, and I'm sure you have been familiar with that. So I don't want to dig deeper on that. But there are two companies which actually come on the top of the mind in terms of for generations they have been able to do that. One is a 3M, other is an Apple, which is a very, very popular company for you, and there you will see this happen. Okay, and only please note that the innovation has undergone a tremendous change over the years, and from an event-based thinking of innovation, it has become a systematic process. And my regret, or I will say that my criticism about Indian corporates is that their evolution from an event linear process to a systematic process is something is still lacking a lot. And therefore, you would see that Indian corporations are struggling in terms of making a real blockbuster innovation, creating product level brands, etc., because it requires a much bigger kind of organization and investment in that process and approach, which is more. So let me close here. But one thing that is very important, that in a corporate context, like when I was mentioning about Apple, or mentioning about, say, 3M, you need to, say, create an environment where individuals can take risks, can fail, and it is not about allowing failure. Actually, what Richard Ferguson has mentioned, it is not about allowing, or rather, tolerate failure. It is about celebrating failure. So that is a cultural notion that innovative companies come in. And this is where again, my observation of Indian corporation is that they are not even tolerant to failure, forget about celebration of failure. And the next stage of entrepreneurship in a family business context or even in a corporate context is fundamentally rooted here. Because we are creating a talent pool who are very entrepreneurial at the root, because the students who are emerging from the different technology schools, etc., they're extremely entrepreneurial. They are willing to take risks, they are willing to take fail, but the corporates have to provide that kind of environment and the support to make that happen. And ultimately, when you talk about all these entrepreneurs' playbook, I recommend, please go through the journey of Steve Jobs and his Apple Incorporation through this history. I think that's the ultimate playbook that we can think of in terms of entrepreneurship of any context, or as an individual, team, or as a corporate entrepreneurship. Sorry, I didn't engage the audience in a questions manner, because there are a lot of things to cover. But any quick question, I will be very happy to address before we close. Okay. Thank you. Thanks a lot.